sun had barely risen when Elias Harwood stepped out of his cabin, the cold morning air brushing his face as he headed toward the horse stalls. Dawn on the frontier was usually quiet. The soft snort of horses, the creak of saddle leather, the rustling of dry grass. But that morning, something felt wrong. He paused mid-step, narrowing his eyes toward the far end of his property. A thin trail of dust curled upward in the distance. Too early for travelers. Too heavy to be a lone rider. Elias wiped his hands on his trousers, the unease settling in his chest like a stone. He saddled his horse quickly and rode toward it, guided by instinct rather than reason. As he approached the ridge, the shapes became clearer: wagons, tired horses, and several rough-looking men. Mercenaries, hired hands with no loyalties except coin. Elias slowed his horse, watching silently as the caravan crawled across his land without permission. Then he saw them, people walking beside the wagons, wrists bound, heads lowered. Captives. Elias felt heat rise in his throat. Not anger exactly, but something heavier. He nudged his horse forward until the mercenaries noticed him. They tensed at first, hands hovering near their belts, but when they saw he was alone, their leader stepped forward with an amused smirk. "Morning, rancher," the man drawled. "Just passing through." "Not on my land you're not," Elias replied, voice calm but firm. His gaze shifted to the prisoners, men and women exhausted from the march. And then he saw her. A young Apache woman stood among them, wrists chained but spine straight, chin lifted. Her eyes didn't carry defeat like the others. They burned with defiance. Even covered in dust, even barely able to stand, she refused to look beaten. Elias couldn't look away. Something about her presence demanded witness. "What are you doing with them?" he asked. The mercenary leader shrugged. "Business. They're worth money where we're headed." Elias felt a tightness in his jaw. "Not through my land." "Going to stop us?" the mercenary teased. "You and your good manners?" The men behind him laughed, but Elias didn't flinch. "They walk free," he said. "All of them." The laughter died. The leader's smirk faded into something colder. "You buying them, rancher? Or just talking big for show?" Elias already knew the answer before he reached into his coat. He pulled out the leather pouch containing nearly everything he had saved over the past year. He tossed it to the mercenary, who weighed it in his palm, grinning wide. "That'll do," the man said. "They're yours now." Elias said nothing. He simply dismounted, approached the captives, and gestured for them to follow him back to the ranch. Some hesitated, confused. Some thanked him quietly. The Apache woman did neither. She watched him with unreadable eyes, guarded as a cornered animal. They reached the ranch at the first hint of dawn. Elias settled the others in the barn and gave what food and blankets he could spare. When he finally approached the Apache woman, she was still standing, refusing to sit, despite exhaustion pulling at her limbs. He offered her a blanket. She didn't take it. He offered water. She stared at him but drank, never breaking eye contact. Only when he took out the key to her shackles did she react. She tensed as if preparing for a blow. Elias moved slowly, unlocking the chains around her wrists. The iron fell away with a dull clink onto the ground. The moment she was free, she stepped back sharply. Her voice, though hoarse, struck like a blade. "I'd rather die than be yours." Elias blinked, surprised by the intensity of her words. "You're not mine," he answered softly. "You're free." She didn't move. Her posture, still stiff with suspicion, sent a pang of sympathy through him. He placed the blanket on a stool beside her, then stepped away. "You can leave whenever you're ready," he said. "No one here will stop you." He walked toward the cabin, leaving the door open behind him. A simple gesture, but he hoped she'd understand. Freedom doesn't need locks. Inside, he didn't look back, though every instinct urged him to. Instead, he sat quietly, listening to the stillness of the morning settling around the ranch again. Outside, Naili, though he didn't yet know her name, stood beneath the pale dawn light, eyes heavy but stubborn. She could have walked away. The land stretched wide and open before her, but her legs trembled from days without rest, and her body refused to obey her pride. So she stayed. Not out of trust. Not yet. but because survival demanded it. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the fields, Elias remained inside his cabin, and the woman he had freed stood alone by the barn, caught between fear and a fragile, unfamiliar hope. She woke to the sound of a horse shifting its weight, a small, ordinary noise that felt like a miracle. The dawn had moved an inch higher, and a thin wash of light leaked through the slats of the barn, striping her shoulders in gold. Nayeli lay on the coarse blanket Elias had left, her wrists feeling strange where the iron had been, lighter and raw, as if the skin itself were surprised to be whole. For a long moment she simply listened. The low exhale of animals, the creak of tack, the soft murmur of someone moving in the kitchen. Safety, she thought, and the word had no promise in it, only a temporary truce. She rose slowly, testing the muscles that had cramped from days of marching and the cramped position she'd slept in the night before. Elias's horses eyed her briefly, nostrils flaring, then turned back to their hay. He had done everything with a quiet efficiency that made the barn feel like a place where chores and care braided together. There was no show of heroics, no grand gestures to bind her in debt. That, perhaps, was the strangest thing of all. Elias was at the washtub when she stepped into the small courtyard, hands turning the cloth over with methodical motion. He looked up only once, offering her a nod that was neither an invitation nor a command. She stepped closer, feeling the heat of the day gather in the air already. "You can eat in the kitchen," he said, voice low. "There's stew from last night and bread." She hesitated, then followed him. Inside, the cabin was simply furnished. A table scarred with use. A shelf with jars of preserved fruit and beans. Sunlight pooled on the floor. None of it shouted wealth. None of it promised traps. She was still listening for the snarl of a bargain to be struck, words that would mark her favor as another's property. When they did not come, when the man returned to his work of cutting onions as if cutting them were as important as breath, something in her resisted, and then, slowly, nodded. They ate together, not speaking of the caravan or of the money he had paid. In the silence there was an unspoken agreement that the past belonged to the road and the present to this simple room. After breakfast, Elias suggested she rest, and despite herself, Nayeli complied. Lying back on the blanket, she watched a slick of sunlight move across the wall and let her thoughts drift. She had not meant to trust. Habit taught her to survive by calculation, by bartering with flesh, with fear, with whatever currency her captors recognized. But here there was no currency, only a man who had decided, without spectacle, to remove the iron from her wrists. Over the following days, routine knitted them into a shape neither had asked for. Nayeli learned the names of the horses: Ash, whose flank bore an old scar; Brindle, nervous as a striking colt; and Dove, an old mare who moved like a memory. Elias showed her how to comb a mane without hurting the animal, how to listen to the breath of a horse to catch the first whisper of sickness. She watched him work, fingers practiced and sure. His hands were large and steady. They soothed the animals more than he could with words. She, in turn, watched the land the way she had old teachers watch the stars, searching for patterns in what seemed random. She taught him how the wind could tell the story of a night. Torn leaves meant a passing coyote. A still pocket behind the low stone meant rain later in the afternoon. He listened like a student, eyes bright, correcting himself when she laughed at his first clumsy attempts to read tracks. They spoke in the small hours, snatches of memory that dared not dwell too long. Nayeli told him about the river where she had learned to tie knots as a child, about the way her mother used to hum while she pounded corn. She did not tell him everything. She kept the sharp edges wrapped in the silence where they fit best. Elias, in return, told a few stories of his own, of winters where the snow had boxed them in and they had learned the true measure of neighbors, of a wife who had died young and of a son who had taken to the road and never returned. He did not wear his grief like armor. He wore it like a coat, practical and necessary, but not meant to frighten. Word of the newcomer spread as words here always did, on the wind and along the thin trail that linked one door to the next. When Elias walked into town to trade and buy supplies, the eyes of the townsfolk traveled with him. Some were curious, Some were careful. Others watched as if measuring what a man with a kindly reputation might cost himself by sheltering a stranger. There were whispers, of course. The town had its old stories and its set comfort with them. An Apache woman at a ranch did not fit neatly onto the shelves of their expectations. "You're soft, Harwood," the blacksmith said one noon, wiping grease on his apron as Elias handed over a few pounds of beef. "Not soft," Elias answered. "Voice even. Just human." The blacksmith snorted. "Folks don't take kindly to strangers who bring trouble." "Nayeli isn't trouble," Elias said, and he left it at that. Nayeli watched him return from town with his stride bared of apology. Each day he came back with more supplies and sometimes with vegetables or a loaf from the baker who had finally stopped to ask questions. When the baker, an old woman with flour in the cracks of her hands, offered her a warm roll, Nayeli accepted. She accepted it with the same caution she used to accept help on the road, but there was no barter attached. She felt, in slow increments, the walls she had raised begin to sag. There were moments when the past visited her with sharp teeth. She would wake at night, heart hammering as if hands reached for her, as if the iron had not been clamped down at all. Once she bolted from bed and found Elias already up, coming from the barn. His presence made the panic retract like a tide. He did not ask what had awakened her. He simply offered a cup of water and the silence of someone who would not press where it hurt. "You don't owe me anything," he said once, as they sat on the low fence watching the sun move toward its high. "You came because you needed a place. Stay as long as you like." Her laughter when it came was brief and brittle. "That is the last thing I want. An obligation." "You could be free and an obligation at once," Elias said. "Freedom is messy." She considered that and found, in some unnameable place, that she believed him. But belief did not mean the absence of fear. The memory of the mercenaries, tone, remained a bruise on her skin. She slept with a knife hidden beneath the blanket for weeks, fingers brushing the cool steel each night for reassurance, until one afternoon Elias found the hidden place. "Why hide a blade here?" he asked, not unkind. "Because hands forget what it's like to survive without one," she answered, neither looking at him nor away. He took the knife, examined it thoughtfully, then returned it to her. "Keep it," he said, "but teach me how to use it. If I'm going to keep you here, I should know how to help, not just pretend." That small exchange opened a new chapter of trust. Lessons became reciprocal. He showed her how to tend a wound with a clean cloth and salve. She showed him how to find the right plant in the arroyo that would staunch bleeding. Underneath the practicalities, they were learning to be present for each other. Present without strings. Present without a long list of expectations. One evening, a stranger rode up the lane with the look of someone who had traveled fast and had things to tell. Elias greeted him on the porch as the sun pulled itself low, turning the sky to a burnished copper. The man dismounted and removed his hat. "Seen any of the mercenary lot?" he asked, voice edged like a file. "Been riding through the passes." Elias's hand tightened slightly on the rail. Nayeli, who had been mending a saddle inside, heard the word and froze. The rhythm of the afternoon shifted. She stood, wiping her hands, listening as if for the exact sound that would tip whether danger was immediate or distant. "Passed near the ridge 2 days back," the man said. "Headed south. Hard men. Bad coin behind them." Elias's voice remained steady. "We saw 'em. They tried to run through our land. I paid for the prisoners." The man's eyebrows rose. "Paid? That's some cost. You sure you didn't wade yourself into trouble, Harwood?" Elias looked at Nayeli before he answered. For the first time since she had come, his expression was one that acknowledged that whatever he had done was not undone by courage alone. He had altered the balance of his life. "I did what I thought was right," he said simply. The stranger left soon after, and the sun dipped behind the hills as if in a rush to hide. That night, the sounds of the ranch were no longer merely the animals and the wind. They were threaded through with an awareness that the mercenaries were not a story one could simply lay down. Nayeli did not speak of leaving out of shame or to protect Elias alone. She considered what it meant to be tethered to a place where people might be called upon to defend what was not theirs, by obligation, but by conviction. She considered, too, the strange, softening thought that perhaps she had not entirely misread Elias on that first morning. The man who had opened the door, literally and figuratively, had not immediately sought to direct her steps. He had left the threshold free. One night, as the sky dripped stars, she sat on the back stoop with him while he smoked a hand-rolled cigarette. The smoke lifted and dissolved into the air, and for a while they were just two figures breathing in the dark. "You ever been claimed?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. He exhaled slowly. "By people to whom I once belonged, yes. By work, by expectation. But not by a person. Not in the way you mean." She let out a small, incredulous sound. He hadn't asked for anything, but still she felt the need to explain. "They would take and call it keeping," she said. "They would say it was for my good. They would make the argument that my days were for their use." He was silent for a long time. "Then you understand why I said what I did that morning. I couldn't stand the idea of you, of anyone, being reduced to a thing to be moved. Maybe," she said, voice low, "maybe I do. But maybe I also know you don't know everything about what it means to be taken." He nodded. "No, I don't. I only know I bought back a few breaths of someone else's life." I didn't buy their story. They let the night hold that. Words were not always necessary. Trust, they were learning, did not come in a single flood, but in 1,000 small moments that together could carry more weight than any chain. Outside, coyotes called once, twice, a long, lonely chorus that threaded the darkness. Nayeli listened, and, for the first time in many nights, felt only the echo of something fading, rather than the immediate threat of a hand closing. She did not yet believe in forever. She only believed, tentatively and cautiously, in morning after morning. The wind rose before dawn, brushing dust across the yard and rattling the thin windows of the cabin. Nayeli woke to the shift in the air, a soft tightening in her chest, telling her the land was trying to speak. She sat up quietly and listened. Something in the pattern of the breeze felt wrong, as if the world were warning her of footsteps that had yet to arrive. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped outside. Elias was already awake, leaning against the fence rail while his coffee steamed in the cool morning. She studied him for a moment, the steady shape of him against the waking sky. For days she had found a strange comfort in the sameness of his presence, but today that comfort felt fragile. "You feel it too," Elias said without turning. She didn't need to ask what he meant. "The wind brings messages before the people do." He nodded and sipped his coffee. "Neighbor came by late last night. Said he saw riders near the canyon ridge, same ones from before, most likely." Her heart dropped, not from fear for herself, but from the truth she had been trying to avoid. Trouble traveled faster than peace, and it had caught up to her again. "I should go," she said quietly. "Before they come." Elias lowered the cup slowly. "Go where?" "Anywhere that isn't here," she replied, stepping back from the fence. "If they come looking for me, you'll be the one paying. They won't let this go." His brows drew together, the beginnings of an argument rising like thunder. "Nayeli, I'm not sending you into the desert alone. You won't last a day without water. You're still healing." "I lived before this place," she said, sharper than she intended. "I can live after it too." "But you don't have to," Elias answered. The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any plea. For a moment she felt anger rise, not at him, but at the unfamiliar ache of being cared for. She had not asked for his kindness. She did not know what to do with it. "Why do you do this?" she demanded. "Why do you insist I stay? You don't know me." "I don't need to know everything about you to protect you," he replied. "You're here, and people here help each other." "Not for free," she snapped. "No one does anything without wanting something. That is what life has taught me." Elias pushed off the fence and faced her fully. "What do you think I want?" She opened her mouth and closed it again, uncertain. She saw no hunger for power in his eyes, no demands, no expectations, only concern. And that terrified her more than cruelty ever had. Cruelty was predictable. Kindness was not. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't know what it feels like to belong to someone against your will, to have your choices taken from you." Elias didn't step toward her, didn't offer pity. He simply held her gaze and spoke softly, like someone setting down a truth between them. "You're right. I don't understand what you went through, but I understand what it feels like to be powerless, to lose people, to wish you could have saved them. I understand more than you think." She stared at him, startled by the depth in his voice. For the first time, she wondered what ghosts walked with him when he closed his eyes at night. He took a breath. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But don't leave because you think you're a burden. You aren't." The wind pushed dust between them, soft and restless. Nayeli turned away, overwhelmed by the weight of a choice she had tried not to make. Inside the barn she moved with purpose, gathering her few belongings. Her hands trembled as she folded the blanket Elias had given her, the one she had secretly grown accustomed to. Each small item felt like a promise she was breaking. She paused, staring at the door, torn in a way that twisted deep inside her. Outside, Elias tended to the horses, giving her the space she needed to decide. But even with distance between them, the air felt tight with the knowledge of what might happen next. The decision pressed down on her until her chest felt too small. She walked out of the barn and found Elias saddling Dove, the old mare with the gentle eyes. Nayeli stopped a few steps away. "You're preparing a horse," she said cautiously. "For you," he replied. "If you're leaving, you're not going on foot. She'll get you farther." Her throat tightened. She hadn't expected him to make it easier. "You shouldn't help me," she said softly. "It'll only bring more trouble to your door." "Trouble already knows where my door is," Elias said. "So do you. That's not something I regret." Before she could answer, another rider appeared over the distant ridge. A lone figure at first, then a second, then a third. They weren't close enough to recognize, but Elias didn't need a closer look to know the danger was real. "They're scouting," he said. "They're looking for something." "For me," she whispered. Elias didn't deny it. Instead, he walked to the porch and retrieved his coat, sliding it on with quiet resolve. "We need to be careful," he said. "Stay close to the ranch buildings. Don't go wandering." "I won't hide," she said. "I never asked you to hide," he replied. "But you don't face this alone." A knot pulled tight in Nayeli's stomach. Everything in her life until now had pushed her to walk alone, to run before others endangered themselves for her. But Elias stood like a fixed point in a storm, refusing to move away from her. "You should be angry with me," she said. "I have brought nothing but danger to your land." "You brought honesty," Elias said. "You brought truth. You brought yourself." She looked away, unable to bear the weight of that gentleness. She had never asked to be seen in a way that made her feel whole. She didn't know how to hold something that delicate without breaking it. The day moved slowly after that. The distant riders never came closer, but their presence lay over the ranch like a shadow waiting to be named. Elias sharpened tools and checked the gates around the horse pen, making quiet preparations that didn't involve weapons or threats, just the small measures of a man who knew danger but refused to be ruled by it. Nayeli spent the afternoon pacing the edge of the property, her mind crowded with memories she didn't want. Every time her thoughts drifted toward escape, another part of her rebelled, not out of fear, but because leaving felt like letting something valuable slip through her fingers. By sunset, she found Elias sitting on the porch steps, rubbing his palms together thoughtfully. The orange light softened the lines on his face, making him look both tired and still strong enough to carry the world if he had to. "I'm staying," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "At least for now." He didn't smile, but relief washed through his features like a slow tide. "Then we face whatever comes next together," he answered. She sat beside him, not touching but closer than she had ever dared before. The wind had changed again, calmer now, as if acknowledging the choice she had made. Night settled over the ranch in a hushed blanket. Somewhere in the hills, a coyote called once, then fell silent. Nayeli stared at the stars as they brightened above, each one a shard of light that seemed sharper than usual. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if danger would sweep down from the ridge, or if peace would linger another day. But for the first time, she wasn't weighing the world alone. That, she realized slowly, was its own form of courage. She glanced at Elias. He sat quiet and steady beside her, as if he had been placed in her path not by chance, but by a patient hand that understood the way broken pieces could fit together without force. She exhaled, long and slow, letting the breath carry away the last whisper of her urge to flee. Tomorrow would come, and whatever it carried, she would face it with him. The day the riders came down from the ridge began with silence so heavy it felt like a held breath. Even the horses seemed uneasy, shifting their weight as though sensing the air tightening around them. Elias rose before dawn, jaws set with the calm tension of a man who expects trouble but refuses to bend beneath it. Nayeli watched from the shadow of the barn, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, her heartbeat steady but aware. She had not slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw dust rising on the horizon, saw shadows forming into men whose intentions she knew too well. She had stayed because she chose to, but choosing didn't erase fear. It only moved fear to a quieter place in her chest, one she could manage. Elias noticed her watching him, and nodded once, a gesture that carried reassurance without hiding the truth. Trouble was coming. Whether it reached the door or passed them by was something they could no longer pretend to guess. As the sun rose, thin and sharp, the dust clouds appeared again, this time closer, moving with purpose. 3 riders at first, then 5. Then more, forming a loose formation that made Elias set down the tools he had been organizing. He wiped his hands on his trousers and walked toward the open yard. Nayeli followed, her footsteps light but certain, and stood beside him. "You should stay near the barn," Elias murmured. "I'm not hiding," she replied. He didn't argue. Instead, he looked at her with a quiet acceptance that tightened her throat. She stood straighter, feeling her resolve settle deep within her bones. The riders slowed as they reached the fence line. Their horses snorted and stamped the dry earth. The leader, broad-shouldered, scar across his cheek, eyes like stones, warmed only by greed, stepped forward. Nayeli recognized him instantly, though she kept her expression still. "Well now," the man said, his voice dripping satisfaction. "We've been looking for something that went missing." Elias didn't move. "If you're looking for trouble, turn around. You won't find what you want here." The man laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Rancher, you bought merchandise, we came to get it back." Nayeli felt the word strike her like a slap. Merchandise. As if her name had never existed, as if her heartbeat meant nothing. Elias's voice stayed steady. "They were people, not property. They walked away free." "Walked away with you," the leader corrected, leaning forward on his saddle. "Funny how folks forget what they owe. That one in particular." His gaze slid to Nayeli, lingering in a way that made her hands curl into fists. "She's worth more than the rest combined." Elias stepped forward slightly, his presence firm but not threatening. "You'll leave this land, now." The leader glanced around the ranch, counting buildings, assessing risk, calculating how much resistance a solitary ranch could offer. His men shifted behind him, some uneasy, others eager. "It's real simple," the man said. "Give the girl back, and maybe we don't burn this place down." Nayeli felt Elias stiffen beside her. She knew that tone. She had heard it before, spoken by men who treated cruelty like currency. But standing here beside Elias, something inside her changed. She wasn't the terrified captive she had been. She wasn't someone waiting for rescue. She wasn't running anymore. She stepped forward of her own accord. "You won't touch this land," she said quietly, "and you will never touch me again." The leader's smirk sharpened. "You think that man can protect you?" "No," she said. "I can protect myself." Elias didn't try to pull her back. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood beside her as though they were 2 walls braced against the same storm. Then, from beyond the ridge, another shape appeared. Then another, and another. Elias recognized the marshal first. An older man who had spent years walking the line between law and mercy in a town that didn't always understand either. He rode at the front of a small group of townsfolk and neighboring ranchers. They weren't armed for battle, but they were present. Eyes steady, postures strong. The leader of the mercenaries looked around, the confidence in his smirk flickering. You gathered yourself a welcome party, Harwood? They came on their own, Elias replied. The marshal nudged his horse forward. You're trespassing, he said. And threatening a rancher on his own land. That's a problem for you. The leader's jaw tightened. His men shifted uneasily. What had begun as intimidation was slipping out of his grasp. He looked at Nayeli again, eyes calculating whether she was worth the risk of a fight he could not win. She belongs to us, he insisted, though the words carried less weight now. No, Elias said calmly. She belongs to herself. The air went still. Even the horses seemed to listen. The leader spat into the dust. This ain't over. Maybe not, Elias replied, but it's over today. The mercenary looked at the marshal's group, then at the ranchers behind him, men who would not stand down, not when the threat was so clear. The numbers weren't in his favor. Neither was the resolve on their faces. Finally, with a growl of frustration, he yanked the reins and turned his horse. One by one, his men followed. They didn't ride slowly. They fled, dust rising behind them like a retreating storm. Only when the last rider vanished over the ridge did the tension release its grip on the air. Nayeli let out a breath. She didn't realize she had been holding. Elias stepped back slightly and looked at her, not with triumph, but with relief so deep it softened the sternness in his eyes. You stood your ground, he said. So did you, she replied. The marshal approached them, tipping his hat. That was brave, he said. Both of you. Elias nodded modestly. Thank you for coming. Didn't come for you, the marshal said with a wry smile. Came because the town finally decided doing nothing wasn't an option. The ranchers behind him murmured agreement. For the first time, Nayeli felt a stir of something unfamiliar. Acceptance, tentative but real. When the visitors finally dispersed, the ranch fell into a hush that felt as deep as a prayer. Nayeli stood in the yard, the weight of fear lifting from her shoulders inch by inch. Her legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the release of months of tension. Elias noticed and stepped closer, careful not to overstep her space. Take your time, he said gently. It's over for now. She nodded, then sat on the low fence rail, bracing her hands on either side of her as she breathed in the cooling evening air. Elias sat beside her but didn't speak, letting silence settle between them like a soft blanket. After a long while, her voice broke the quiet. When I saw them, when I heard them speak, I felt the old chains again, not on my wrists, but in my mind. Elias listened, his posture open and steady. But then, she continued slowly, I saw you standing there, and something in me changed. I wasn't running from them anymore. I wasn't trying to disappear. I wanted to stay, to face them, with you beside me. Elias looked at her, eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't name, not possession, not expectation, but a quiet, steady warmth that made her breath tremble. You weren't alone, he said softly. Not then, not now. Her eyes stung, but she blinked the feeling away before it could fall. She had spent so long learning not to break that the idea of softening felt strange and dangerous. The sun dipped low, brushing the ranch in gold. Nayeli looked across the land that had become more than shelter. It had become a place where her feet felt steady, a place where her voice mattered, a place where she was not claimed, but seen. She turned to Elias, a faint smile touching her lips. Tomorrow, she said, I want to help fix the fence. And the barn roof. And whatever else needs doing, he nodded. I'd like that. She drew in a long breath. The air smelled of dust, horses, and a new horizon she had chosen with her own will. Tonight, she thought, she would sleep without hiding her knife. Tonight, she would let the stars keep watch instead of her fear. And for the first time in longer than she could measure, she felt not hunted, but free. The ranch woke slowly in the days after the confrontation, as if the land itself were taking a careful breath. Spring had begun its quiet work on the hills, softening the hard winter edges with patches of tender green. Morning light filtered through thin clouds, gentle and warm, carrying the promise of a season that healed what winter had broken. For the first time in a long while, Nayeli felt the world smooth beneath her feet instead of shifting like sand. She rose early each morning, finding comfort in the small rituals of work, brushing the horses, carrying buckets of feed, repairing the worn fence boards with Elias at her side. There was peace in the repetition, in knowing exactly what came next. Elias had always worked with quiet discipline, but now there was a small, almost invisible change in the way he moved. He no longer looked toward the horizon expecting trouble. He walked the ranch with a slower breath, as if he finally allowed himself to feel the safety he had given to others for so long. He didn't mention the mercenaries or the threat they had posed. He didn't need to. Their absence was its own kind of conversation. Nayeli noticed, too, how the townsfolk had changed. Where there had been whispers before, there were now nods of acknowledgement when Elias rode into town for supplies. Some of the ranchers who had come during the confrontation stopped by the fence to check on them. Even the baker's wife brought a basket of warm rolls one morning and left them at the gate without asking for anything. Nayeli watched it all with wary curiosity. Acceptance was a new language to her, and she was still learning its grammar. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the fence near the creek, Elias paused and wiped sweat from his brow. "The snow melts stronger this week," he said. "The creek might rise by next month." Nayeli knelt beside him, tying wire around a post. "Does it flood often?" "Some years," he said. "Depends on how stubborn the winter was." She smiled faintly. "Winters seem stubborn everywhere." Elias chuckled, a low sound that blended easily into the quiet around them. They worked in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "After the snow melt, I'm planning to ride into the canyon to gather dry wood. Could use some help." Nayeli looked up sharply, surprised he had asked. "You want me to come?" "If you want to," he said simply. "You know how to read land better than I do. I'd value the company." The sincerity in his tone settled in her chest like a warm stone. She had been invited before, in other places, by other men, but those invitations had been traps, wrapped in the illusion of choice. Elias's invitation felt different. It had no hooks. "I'll come," she said, "if only to make sure you don't take the wrong path." He grinned. "I probably would." As the days passed, the land continued to soften, and Nayeli found herself easing into a rhythm she had never imagined for her life. She had grown used to waking with one ear open, ready to run or fight or bargain. But here, each morning began the same way, with the smell of coffee drifting from the cabin, with the horses nudging at the stall doors, with Elias stepping out onto the porch and scanning the horizon with a calm that slowly, steadily found its way into her. But even peace carried an ending. It came gently, not like a storm, but like a letter handed to her by the wind. One evening, after the sun dipped below the hills in a blaze of gold, Nayeli walked to the edge of the property, where the land opened into a wide plain. She stood there for a long while, watching the shadows stretch across the earth. The air smelled faintly of rain and distant pine. Somewhere beyond the horizon, her people lived. Her mother's songs lived. Her memories lived. A part of her longed to return, not out of duty but out of completeness. She felt the pull like a quiet tug inside her chest, soft but insistent. She didn't want to leave the ranch out of fear, and she didn't want to stay out of guilt. For the first time since she had arrived, she could choose. That choice carried weight. Elias found her on the ridge just before nightfall. He didn't speak right away. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets, gazing at the darkening land. "You're thinking about home," he said gently. "Yes," she whispered. "Not because I'm running, but because I'm ready to walk toward something." He nodded once, and that simple gesture made her eyes burn with unexpected emotion. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He didn't ask her to stay out of loneliness. Instead, he honored the space she stood in. "When do you want to go?" he asked. "When the moon is full," she said. "It will give me good light. I'll help you pack." She swallowed. "Elias, I didn't think I would ever want to go back. I didn't think I would ever get the choice." "You earned it," he said. "You always had it. You just needed the space to remember." The night deepened around them, stretching over the fields like a calm, dark blanket. Nayeli stood in the quiet, feeling the weight of her decision settle, not as a burden, but as a truth she could carry without pain. Over the next days, she prepared for her journey. Elias helped, without hesitation. He packed dried meat, a canteen, herbs for medicine, matches sealed in wax, and a small blanket rolled tightly with rope. He repaired the saddle for Dove, ensuring every strap was strong. Each action he took was careful, respectful, and steady, even though she saw the sadness in his eyes. The evening before she left, they shared a quiet meal by lamplight. The cabin glowed warmly, the fire crackling soft in the hearth. Nayeli watched Elias across the table, memorizing the slope of his shoulders, the calm steadiness in his movements. She hadn't realized how much space he took in her world until she imagined walking without his presence beside her. When the meal ended, Elias stood and reached for a small wooden carving on the shelf. He handed it to her without ceremony, a small horse, shaped with rough but earnest craftsmanship. "For luck," he said. "And so you remember the ranch, and that you're welcome here as long as I breathe." She held the carving gently, the wood warm from his hand. It was the first gift she had received in years that wasn't a token of ownership or expectation. It was simply kindness, shaped into form. The full moon rose the next night, silver and wide, filling the land with a quiet glow. Nayeli saddled Dove before dawn, her fingers moving with certainty, even as her chest ached. Elias stood nearby, holding the reins as she secured her bedroll. When everything was ready, he looked at her with a steady, almost fragile calm. "If you ever need a place," he said, "you know where to come." She nodded, her throat tight. "I will come back," she said softly. "Not because I owe it, not because I must, but because I want to." Elias breathed in slowly, as if the words stitched something together inside him. She placed her foot in the stirrup and swung gently into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her, picking up the familiar weight. She turned Dove toward the open land, ready to follow the trail toward her people, but she looked back one last time. Elias stood on the porch, hands by his sides, watching her with unwavering steadiness, not claiming, not holding, simply witnessing. The light of the rising sun brushed the edge of his coat, casting him in the soft glow of early morning. "I'll see you again," she said. "I'll be here," he replied. Then she rode, her figure growing smaller with each stride. The land opened before her like a long, unwritten page, waiting to be filled by her choosing. And as the ranch faded behind her, her heart carried a quiet certainty. This was not an ending. It was the first true beginning she had ever walked toward. In a land shaped by dust, danger, and long-forgotten promises, Elias and Nayeli proved that freedom and kindness can tame even the wildest storms. Their paths may lead them in different directions, but the bond they forged, built on trust instead of chains, will forever echo across the frontier. In the end, love is not possession. Love is the courage to let someone choose their own way, and the hope that someday they choose to return. If you enjoyed this journey through courage, healing, and unexpected love, make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles so you never miss another heartwarming tale from the untamed frontier. More unforgettable stories await, full of grit, passion, and Western romance. Saddle up, hit that subscribe button, and ride with us into the next adventure.